Debbie Webster pleaded guilty to dangerous driving and causing the death of Billy Mayhew in Coronation Street. But that wasn't the biggest plot twist in today's episode. This character seems determined to protect her younger brother Carl, who was actually driving the car that caused the multiple vehicle collision, including several Emmerdale residents' cars. After realizing the severity of his actions, he placed her lifeless body in the car, hoping she would escape punishment thanks to early-onset amnesia. Their brother Kevin Michael Lavelle immediately realized what had happened when he saw Carl staggering drunk into the car shortly after Debbie's wedding. Carl intended to flee with the money he had stolen from Debbie's hotel empire, angered by her silence about his mother, Elaine, trying to contact him in her final days. When Debbie discovered the money was missing, she covered her tracks and explained that she had given it to him. But why would she want him free so badly? In today's episode, Debbie appears in court after being charged with causing a multi-car pileup. Her family advised her not to plead guilty, but she insisted she was responsible and had to bear the consequences. After pleading guilty, she returned home, and her husband, Ronnie Bailey, worried that this would seriously affect her health as a prison sentence could worsen her cognitive decline. Law Adam Barlow promised to use all this information to his client's advantage in the defense. Although, of course, that wouldn't be easy now that she had admitted guilt. Back home, Debbie took out a keepsake box and began looking through a series of old photos and belongings from her life. Hidden in the lining of the box was the birthmark bracelet Carl wore. Tears welled up when she turned the card over and discovered that the boy's mother was none other than Deborah Webster. Why was Carl raised as Debbie's younger sister? And will she ever tell him the truth? The silence of the hallway was shattered by the deafening crash of porcelain against the wall, a violent explosion of shards that mirrored the fracturing sanity of the Webster dynasty. Ronnie Bailey stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and confusion as Debbie collapsed onto the rug, her hands clawing at her temples as if trying to physically tear the truth out of her mind. The bracelet, that damning loop of silver, lay cinched into her palm, burning with a secret that threatened to incinerate what little future she had left. The immediate aftermath of the plea hearing had transformed the Webster residence into a mausoleum of suffocated whispers. Debbie remained on the floor, her breathing ragged, the air around her thick with the dust of the smashed vase. Ronnie moved toward her, his movements fluid but hesitant, like approaching a wounded animal that might bite. He reached out, his warm hand engulfing her trembling shoulder, but the contact sent a jolt of electricity through Debbie that had nothing to do with affection and everything to do with panic. She scrambled backward, her heels digging into the carpet, clutching the keepsake box to her chest with a ferocity that bordered on mania. "Debbie, look at me," Ronnie implored, his voice cracking under the strain of the day's events. "You're spiraling. We need to call the doctor." This admission of guilt, it's tearing your mind apart faster than the disease ever could. Debbie couldn't focus on his face. Her vision blurred, swimming with tears in the terrifying, encroaching fog of her cognitive decline. But amidst the gray haze of her memory, one fact stood out in stark, high-definition neon. "He is my son." The words echoed in the cavern of her skull, bouncing off the walls of her conscience. The boy she had protected, the brother she had scolded, was the child she had abandoned to the ledge. And now she was going to prison for a crime he committed, a twisted penance for a lifetime of deception. "I'm fine," she lied, the words tasting like ash. She forced herself to stand, her legs shaking violently. I need air.
I need to be alone, Ronnie. Please."
Outside, the weather on the cobbles had turned malevolent. A biting wind whipped through Coronation Street, rattling the window panes of the terrified and the guilty alike. Across the street, in the shadowy recess of the garage, Kevin Webster was pacing like a caged tiger. The smell of grease and stale oil usually calmed him, but tonight it choked him. He slammed a wrench onto the workbench, the metallic clang resonating like a judge's gavel. He knew the realization had been a slow-burning fuse in his gut ever since he saw Carl stumbling away from the wreckage, the reek of alcohol trailing him like a phantom. Kevin had stayed silent in the immediate chaos, paralyzed by shock. But Debbie's court appearance had snapped him out of his stupor.
She was taking a fall.
His sister, whose mind was already a crumbling fortress, was walking into a cell to protect a coward. Kevin grabbed his jacket, his movements jerky and fueled by a righteous volcanic anger. He wasn't going to let Debbie rot. He was going to find Carl, and he was going to drag the truth out of him, even if he had to break every bone in his own hand to do it. Meanwhile, in the sleek, sterile environment of the solicitor's office, Adam Barlow was wearing with his own ethical compass. He sat surrounded by towers of paperwork, the glow of his laptop illuminating his furrowed brow. He was reviewing the traffic camera footage from the night of the crash footage that was supposedly inconclusive. But Adam had found something, a shadow, a figure exiting the driver's side mere seconds after the collision, moving with a youthful agility that Debbie, even on her best day, did not possess. Adam leaned back, rubbing his eyes. He had promised to use everything to Debbie's advantage. But she had handcuffed him with her guilty plea. If he revealed this evidence now, he would be proving his own client a liar. He would be dismantling her sacrifice. But could he stand by and watch an innocent woman, a sick woman, go down for manslaughter? The moral ambiguity tasted bitter, like stagnant coffee. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over Kevin's number, before slamming the device back down on the desk. He needed to confront Debbie first. Miles away, in a dingy motel room on the outskirts of Manchester, Carl was drowning. Not in water, but in the amber liquid of a cheap whiskey bottle. The curtains were drawn, blocking out the accusatory light of the world, but they couldn't block out the noise in his head. The screech of tires, the sickening crunch of metal, Billy Mayhew's face. Carl paced the small room, the stolen money sitting in a duffel bag on the bed. It mocked him. It was supposed to be his ticket to freedom, a new life away from the suffocating judgment of the street. Instead, it felt like blood money. He had watched the news on his phone, seen Debbie's face as she left the courthouse, her expression a mask of stoic resignation.
Why?
He whispered to the empty room, his voice. Why didn't you oar me out, Deb? He didn't know the truth. He didn't know that the biological imperative of a mother protecting her young was fierce enough to override logic, law, and self-preservation. To him, it was just another confusing layer of the Webster family dysfunction. A heavy pounding on the motel door made him jump. The whiskey bottle slipping from his grasp and thumping onto the carpet. Carl, I know you're in there. It was Kevin. The voice was a growl vibrating through the thin wood. Carl scrambled backward, tripping over the duffel bag. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced his drunken haze. He looked at the window too small to climb out of. He was trapped. The door splintered near the lock as Kevin kicked it. Once, twice. With a final splintering crack, the door flew open, bouncing off the wall. Kevin stood there, silhouetted by the hallway light, looking less like a mechanic and more like an executioner. You coward, Kevin spat, stepping into the room. The air tension was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Kevin, wait. I can explain. Carl stammered, holding his hands up in a pathetic gesture of surrender. Explain? Kevin launched, grabbing Carl by the collar of his shirt and slamming him against the wall. The impact knocked the wind out of the younger man. Explain how you let your sister, a woman who can barely remember what day to stand in a courtroom, and confess to killing a man. Explain how you're packing a bag to run while she's packing a bag for prison. I didn't ask her to, Carl yelled back, fear giving him a sudden burst of adrenaline. He shoved Kevin away. She told me to go. She gave me the money, because she's sick. Carl. She's confused. Kevin roared, advancing again. But you just rotten. You drove that car. You killed Billy. It was an accident. Carl screamed, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat of his terror. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was angry about Mom, about Elaine. Kevin froze. The mention of Elaine hung in the air. Don't you dare talk about family. You don't know the meaning of the word. Back at the house, Debbie was fighting a losing battle against her own biology. The stress of the memory recovery had triggered a severe episode. She sat on the edge of her bed, the room spinning. The past and present were bleeding together. She saw the baby in her arms, Carl, tiny and fragile. And then she saw him as a man staggering from the car. The bracelet lay on the nightstand, a silent accuser.